16. The sales comparison approach. A few weeks after moving into their new home, Michael's brother, Jason, decided it was finally time to buy his first house. He called Michael and asked a question that many first-time buyers ask. How did the appraiser know what your house was worth? Michael smiled. I used to think they just looked at Zillow. Sarah laughed. I've learned it's a lot more complicated than that. She was right. Of the three traditional approaches to value, the sales comparison approach is the one most commonly used for residential real estate. It is also the approach that buyers and sellers naturally understand because it reflects how most people shop for homes. Think about your own clients. When buyers begin searching for a home, they rarely ask to see every property in Arizona. Instead, they compare similar homes. How many bedrooms? How many bathrooms? How old is the home? How large is the lot? Is there a pool? Has the kitchen been updated? Appraisers follow a very similar process. Rather than guessing a property's value, they compare it to recently sold properties that are as similar as possible. These comparable properties are commonly called comps. Let's imagine you're listing a home in Gilbert. The property contains 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, 2,400 square feet, a 3-car garage, a swimming pool, and backs to a neighborhood greenbelt. When the appraiser begins the assignment, they won't compare that home to a 2-bedroom condominium in downtown Phoenix, nor will they compare it to a luxury custom estate in Paradise Valley. Instead, they'll search for recently sold homes that compete directly with the subject property in the eyes of typical buyers. This is one reason location is so important. Whenever possible, appraisers select comparable sales from the same subdivision or nearby neighborhoods with similar market characteristics. They also try to use recent sales because markets can change quickly. Here's where many agents get into trouble. A seller proudly hands the appraiser a list of homes currently for sale and says, "These prove my house is worth $700,000. Current listings certainly provide useful market information, but they represent asking prices, not completed sales. Remember, anyone can ask any price. The sales comparison approach relies primarily on what buyers have actually paid, not what sellers hope to receive. That distinction is critical. Once comparable sales have been selected, the appraiser begins making adjustments. This concept often confuses buyers. Imagine the subject property has a swimming pool, but comparable sale number 1 does not. If buyers in that neighborhood consistently pay more for homes with pools, the appraiser adjusts the comparable, not the subject property. In other words, the goal is to answer this question. What would comparable sale number 1 likely have sold for if it had the same features as the subject property? The same process applies to other differences. Perhaps one comparable has an extra bedroom, another has a larger lot, a third has recently remodeled bathrooms. One may have mountain views while another backs to a busy roadway. Every adjustment reflects how the market reacts to those differences. Notice something important. Appraisers don't adjust properties based on construction costs or personal opinions. Adjustments are supported by market evidence. If buyers consistently pay approximately $15,000 more for homes with 3-car garages in a particular neighborhood, the adjustment reflects that market behavior. If buyers place little value on an expensive home theater, the adjustment may be surprisingly small, despite the homeowner's investment. This is why homeowners are sometimes disappointed. A seller may spend $80,000 remodeling a kitchen. The market may recognize only a portion of that investment, because buyers compare the home to competing properties rather than to the owner's renovation costs. Let's return to Jason. After touring several homes, he asked his real estate agent why one house was priced significantly higher than another, with almost the same square footage. The agent opened a recent CMA and explained how location, condition, upgrades, lot size, and recent comparable sales affected pricing. Jason suddenly realized he had been focusing on size alone. The appraiser and his agent were evaluating the entire package. This is one reason experienced brokers spend considerable time preparing comparative market analyses before recommending listing prices. Although a CMA is not an appraisal, both rely on the same basic principle. Comparable properties help establish a reasonable estimate of market value. The difference is that appraisers perform a more comprehensive analysis under US PAP standards and produce a formal appraisal report designed to support lending decisions. For most Arizona single-family homes, the sales comparison approach receives the greatest emphasis because it best reflects how typical buyers make purchasing decisions. In the next section, we'll examine a very different method of valuation, the cost approach. Rather than asking what similar homes have sold for, the cost approach begins by asking a different question. What would it cost to build this property today? Broker tip: When preparing a CMA, don't simply select the highest recent sales to justify a listing price. Choose comparable properties that truly compete with the subject property. A well-supported CMA not only helps your client price the home realistically, but also increases the likelihood that the appraisal will support the agreed-upon purchase price. Online discussion. 1. Why is the sales comparison approach the primary valuation method for most residential properties? Answer. Most buyers purchase homes by comparing similar properties in the marketplace. The sales comparison approach mirrors this behavior by analyzing recent comparable sales and adjusting for differences, making it the most reliable approach for many owner-occupied residential properties. 2. Why are recently sold comparable properties generally more useful than active listings? Answer. Sold properties reflect actual market behavior because buyers and sellers completed the transaction. Active listings represent asking prices, which may change before a sale occurs and do not necessarily reflect market value. 3. Why does an appraiser adjust the comparable sales instead of adjusting the subject property? Answer. The subject property serves as the benchmark. Adjustments are made to the comparable sales to estimate what they would likely have sold for if they possess the same characteristics as the subject property, allowing for a more accurate comparison.